Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our security DevOps talk. We're hosting Spotify engineer Linda, who kindly stepped in when I was like, please come to Nguyen, because I'm a co-op at Spotify. So it's a real honor to have her. And she's going to talk about security, how to get into it, all the different subsegments of security, and even take us through a couple of exercises, I believe. So it's super great of her to come, and I hope you guys enjoy the talk. Before we start, we have a couple reminders. First, we're hosting a sticker design competition or contest. So it's more of a contest than a competition. And I believe Rachel will be posting the link for that in the Slack, but the deadline is coming up pretty soon. I think it's, when is it? March 29th. So yeah, that's in about a week, so you guys don't have too much time. The other thing is we're finally having Nguyen merch. And so if you'd like some Nguyen merch, we have a form for that. And it closes on April 2nd, so please fill that out. Do we have final details on cost, Rachel?
Cost for the merch?
Yeah.
It's $8 for
$8.
a shirt.
We were able to subsidize some of it, so hopefully, $8 is a reasonable price point for a hoodie, I believe. So if you guys want an epic Nguyen hoodie, please buy one. We're very, very happy to finally be able to have them after like a year of trying. But without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor off to Linda. I believe you're co-host. Excellent. So you should be able to share your screen without any issues.
Cool. Hey guys, I'll just start off by sharing presentation, and in there is an introduction slide, and yeah. So can you see my screen? Cool. So get started security engineer. That's my email. So because we couldn't get it approved in time, I did not leave my Spotify email there, but my Spotify email is just Linda N without the dot at spotify.com. So if you want to contact me there, and I'll get more into it later. Yeah, so who the heck am I? I'm me. So I graduated from NYU with a BS in computer science, and I am relatively new to the workforce, so I would say I'm entry level. My first job was in federal service, so I can tell you guys about that in case you're considering that. I worked for the Department of Defense. And now you're just like, well, that's a whole department. What does that really mean? When you work for the government, if you work in cybersecurity, you can imagine that you work in kind of like espionage, foreign intelligence kind of space. So what that really means is this means that we can't say what three-letter organization I work for. So we're just going to say, oh, it's the department. But I will give you a short overview of what those three agencies tend to hire and what they do. So the first one would be the FBI. The FBI handles domestic threats. So they don't worry about Russia or China. What they do is that if there's domestic terrorists, right, they track their phones, they track their locations, things like that. Then there's the CIA. Honestly, I'm not too sure what the CIA does. It's kind of like an overarching structure of foreign intelligence, but also domestic intelligence. But the best way to describe the CIA is actually by describing what the NSA does. And what the NSA does is the NSA collects foreign intelligence. So the difference between the NSA and the CIA is the CIA collects information about people, and the NSA collects information about technology or communication. So I worked for as a digital network exploitation analyst. A lot of federal jobs are a mouthful. But what I did there was that the government would intercept network sessions, and they would want to know which ones were of interest, which ones were not. So I would basically filter through network sessions to see what was interesting and what wasn't. And the way we did that was that there were reports. Let's say like there's this malware that Russia likes to use. So then there would always be the string like Russia is so cool. So I would like scroll through and like write code that would take out all the sessions that had something that Russia is so cool. And that's the entirety of what I did at the Department of Defense. I was only there for a year, but of course there are many other roles. But primarily what I was doing there was a programmer in C++. Right now I work at Spotify, so that is quite a change. And I really like it here. So at Spotify, I'm a security engineer, but as you can see later, security engineer could mean anything. Simply put, I work in product security, which is automating tools into the developer workflow. And that's a picture of my college right there. And that's me eating barbecue in Maryland. And I love barbecue. Oh, and going back, something, because I always feel going back to college, the things that mattered in college don't necessarily matter like after college. So like, I did not have the best GPA. So like, if you don't have the best GPA either, you know, that's okay. I had a 3.3, and I believe the average for engineering schools is like 3. But when I was applying to jobs fresh out of college, you know, the people who got like the big tech jobs, right, they had really high GPAs. And I was just like, oh, I could never do that. But, you know, things just work out. So just don't worry, sweat too much about the GPA. So what unit is security? So sounds really cool. Everyone thinks, you know, it's hacking, and it is, but from a company perspective, it's more about preventing the hacking in the first place. So not as exciting, but you can still hack your own products to see where it's insecure. And then from there, you can prevent, you know, the hackers from coming and patch that vulnerability before it even happens. So it's more about protecting yourself more so than attacking other people. So I guess the best way of putting it is like, you know, you have a house, you got your windows, you got your doors. What you do is that you check your windows and your doors. You don't go around yelling at people, breaking into houses and windows. You protect your own house. And that's basically your job. So that's like very conceptual, but like what do you even do, right? And where do you even start? So I would say that there are categories that you can go into. And so these are categories. So web is web applications, which is very big nowadays. There's forensics. Forensics is like sort of like NCIS, I guess. It's what you can do is that given a computer or a device or memory, right, what information or metadata can you extract from it? Forensics kind of leans towards the law side. So like, it's really cool, or, you know, given a device or given like a snapshot or a backup, you can like, you knew what the person was doing exactly at that moment. But more so, forensics is used to gather evidence to use in court against someone. And that's where it turns into a job. There's reverse engineering, which is as it sounds, given some software or some device or some sort of program, you know, how does it work? And from there, you know, how do you break how it works? So an example, I guess, would be like, you know how like when you're, I don't know about you guys, but when I was in middle school, right, my school was like, hey, you got to use Microsoft Office. I'm just like, okay, I don't know how to buy Microsoft Office. So then I looked up random license keys online. So some people, they're able to get those random license keys through reverse engineering because they know what formula the license key is checking for. And networking, it's a subset of forensics, but basically, for example, when you're at an internship or at work, or even connected to the school network, right? They are monitoring what you are doing and they are capturing some of that. So for networking, it's more about analyzing that, maybe building infrastructure around that. And then for cryptography, it's as it sounds, it's solving ciphers and encrypting, decrypting, all that fun math stuff. So these can eventually spiral into careers. But there is a secret one, and that is the one that I am in. So a lot of people, this is like a controversial opinion, but a lot of people say that, you know, security engineers aren't great programmers. And I would say that, you know, programmers are the best programmers, but it is very useful to have programming in your tool set. And a programmer can become a security engineer. So yeah, so because tools need to be built. So a lot of products right now are being built to automate security. Whether or not you can, that's a different question. But yeah, so people build tools to say like I said, with networking, when they're like monitoring employee traffic, they're like, oh, we can immediately know when employees being hacked and things like that. And some of them are pretty cool. Some of them use AI. So if you're interested in that, it's kind of like you can kind of spin anything in security. So, the question that everyone worries about, how do I make money from this? So first things first, anytime, if you're applying to jobs, anytime you see the word analyst, that's actually leaning more towards entry level. And all of these could be considered security engineers. So right off the bat, that's kind of like the umbrella. So for web, I've seen many people be security consultants, and that's for security consultancies. And those are companies that basically are like, hey, we have a product. Let's say Facebook goes to consultancy. Oh, we have Facebook. How can it be hacked? And let's say we give you 2 weeks. How far can you get hacking it? So that's your job. You actually get to hack Facebook, and then you produce the results. And then Facebook's like, oh, cool, thanks. Like, here's a ton of money. The drawback I've heard of being a security consultant this way is that although it is fun to hack, at the end, you kind of have to write like a book report about what you've done, and some people don't like that. But that's just from what I've heard. And then with forensics, there's a forensics analyst. Like I said, let's say you work for a forensics consultancy, and then some lawyer comes in and he's like, oh, I've heard that, this guy, he's been stalking some girl. Can you prove that? And here's his computer. So forensics analyst, what you do is, get hard proof from the computer or the device or the memory that of some evidence to use in court. But I've also seen research positions for forensics. So you may not even necessarily have to mingle with the law. And then, of course, reverse engineering, that's more research orientated. You can be a security consultant and also reverse engineer. But when you're a security consultant, it seems like more often people hack web applications. And for networking, that is also a place that's big in hiring. Networks are hard. A lot of people need more people to maintain the infrastructure. Cryptography is also more like academia research orientated. I haven't really seen many jobs for those, but I have seen some cryptography engineer. And software development, you can be a software engineer, but for a company that makes a security tool. So yeah, I would say if out of all of these, web and networking are probably hiring the most. So security consultancies or any company that needs a network analyst. And something interesting is that even though right now they're not really hiring, things may change in the future. So when I worked at the Department of Defense, a lot of what they did was breaking code to, let's say, break another country's code and steal their information. Well, with cryptography, right, they would hire cryptographers. But now that Google is starting to make like many products that need encryption, they're actually starting to hire from that pool. So it's like, you don't necessarily have to worry about the job market, right? If you're good enough, they'll find a use for you. So I figured, being lectured at is kind of like boring, and I love like interactive presentations. So I have some demos and some exercises. Unfortunately, there's only one exercise that you can sort of follow because normally to do these exercises, you require tools. And this is the only demo where you do not require a tool. So you can go to this URL, hopefully it's still up, and mess around. But in the meanwhile, I'll be talking and then I'll go through the exercise. So with web security, an example of what a security consultant could be doing is hacking a web application. And one way you could do that is SQL injection. This site called OAuth Top 10, it's a reference that many people often use. And it's the top 10 vulnerabilities that often occur in web applications. So if you get started there, you can just read about what often happens. And Portsfigure, which is a company that creates a tool for web hacking, they have like a little academy that teaches you, and it has great resources like articles and exercises. So what is SQL injection? I don't really know the audience So, I mean, would most of you say you know what SQL is?
I think it would be a good idea to give an overview because we tend to have a wide range of students. So like freshmen, but like also seniors. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So SQL, I should probably know what it stands for, but something query language. And I can look it up. But basically, it's the language that you use to communicate with databases. So it's just like a code that you do from databases. So it can be something like, let me try to share my browser or new tab in Sublime Text, actually. Oops, wrong one. See. Cool. So let's say you have a database and it's a table and it's named like cat, let's say, and a cat has, let's say, attributes like weight, color. So if you wanted to like get all the cats, you would do something like select star from cat. I guess more correctly, it would be cats. But SQL generally looks something like this. So it's just like, oh, give me all the information from the table about cats. You can also like change it up so you prefer certain columns, but more or less this is the idea. And this is how you do a comment in SQL. This will matter a little later. So with that said, what web applications often do is that they use SQL to interface between the user and the website. So let's say you're on Amazon.com, right? And you're like, oh, I want to buy, I don't know, a vest for my cat, right? So it would be something like select, what would it select? Say item name from warehouse, where the name is something like, and you're like, oh, a cat vest. So basically, a lot of times when you're querying, you're not even aware you're querying, but when you're filtering for something or accessing information, it becomes this SQL query that is fed into the database and it basically spits it right back at you. And the problem with this is that often, this is actually a kind of old bug, but often, right, where does the code begin and where does the user input end, right? So the cat vest is what you said, right? But how do we know that we can really trust cat vest, right? You can manipulate it into being code because how does the computer know what is code and what isn't? It would, right now, the computer assumes that the whole thing is code. So it's kind of weird to say, but let's see. It makes more sense if you go through with the presentation, but this is me. And then challenge. Cool. So I made a little like website you guys can play with. It's called Stimulus Checker. Doesn't check your stimulus for real. I just couldn't think of anything. But let's say that, you know, you want to check your stimulus check status. Hold up. Let's say your name is, I have some people that I made up. Your name is Joey Galbo, and your social security number is that.
Oh wait, are we supposed to see the website that you're?
Yeah.
Oh, are you not seeing?
No,
We just see like your, like, I don't know, like your notepad.
Oh, okay.
You might have to reshare.
Hold on. Yeah.
if you share your desktop, it will like, and you might not want to if there's stuff on there you don't want us to see, but okay, there it is.
Oh, cool. So yeah, this is my stimulus checker, and this is an example of a user browsing a website normally. So then you put in the zip code, which is 27472. So this is an example of valid input, right? This is exactly what the computer expects, and it returns the results from the database that, let's say their check is 1,400 and what their status is, right? But what if, I wanted to see someone else's text, right? What if I wanted to hack it, right? So I made another user, right? And let's say we wanted to see Beyonce, right? But we don't know what her social is and we don't know what her zip code is, right? And it's just really unhappy that like, no matter what we do, we can't figure out anything about Beyonce. Well, what you can do, like I said, is that the computer may not necessarily know what is data and what is code. So you could tell it, oh, but this is code that you can use. So let's say it's Beyonce, right? And what if you comment out the rest, right? Because right now it is doing something like, how do I open new file? Can you see my notepad now?
Yeah.
Right. So right now it's doing something like select amount of stimulus check. And then it also wants the progress from some table where name is this and your social security number is this and your zip code is that. So let's say we just didn't know and we just put 1 for everything. So we want to figure out what Beyonce is, like her stuff, right? So what I entered was Beyonce space dash dash, and this is a comment. So what that means is that the whole query simply becomes that you just want to get Beyonce stuff. And I believe this should work. Yeah. So you can see that previously for Joey, his process, his status was that it was in transit. But for Beyonce, her check is 1,400 and it's processing. It's like, great, cool. But there's even more that we can find, right? So what? We know what Beyonce's stimulus check is. Well, what if we could get her social security number, right? Because that's what's stored in the database as well to confirm whether or not she's Beyonce. So if we go back, we could do something like where her name is Beyonce, and then so in SQL, there's something you can do called union select, and what that means is that I would also like to know this. So you just join it. And because in SQL, there often are quotes, the name would look something like this. So name is Beyonce. We want to also get her social security number, her ID from, and the thing with table names is often hackers, when they're working, they actually don't really know your table name. But I mean, logistically, right, it's not hard to guess. Sometimes it's users, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's persons. Let's say in this case, we were able to guess correctly and be like, oh, it's persons. Beyonce. Okay, so what the heck does this do? So what we want to say is, give us Beyonce's stimulus check amount and her status from whatever you know, but also give us her social security number and her ID. And the reason why we care about her ID is that we really don't. But when you do union selects, it's just a quirk of SQL that generally, if you select 2 columns here, you need to select the same amount of columns here. And this should work. But, fingers crossed. Yes. So not only did we get Beyonce's status of her stimulus check, but we also got her social security number, which I didn't know, so I just put it all one. But the point is that you can extract more information than intended. And this kind of vulnerability is very old. It's been around for a while, and I've heard that, oh, people don't really make this mistake anymore, but it turns out they kind of still do. There was a hack very recently. Let's see how recent. I believe it was like last week or 2 weeks ago. But basically, there was this website. I believe it's some sort of online forum, and the CTO, which is Chief Technology Officer, which is someone who should know better, basically in terms of technology. He accidentally got rid of a line that sanitized the user input. So normally with forms, when you do something like these, what we just did, normally what the application does is that it strips out all the SQL it finds, and it's like, nope, this is data. Do not run this as a command. But the CTO actually did accidentally run it leave the data and mark it as code. And what happened was that 70 gigabytes of user data was exposed to like random people. So that would be like, Beyonce's social security number, but whatever their site was holding. So yeah, and there's lots of examples of like companies doing like kind of bad practice. I mean, I have some on the slides, but a personal one was that if any of you have taken a database class, one thing they always tell you is, actually, did they tell me that? Maybe not in mine, but they should be telling you that when you store passwords, they should not be in plain text. You should hash them. The reasoning for this is, if someone ever does hack you, they can't see what your password is. And there's this app called Robinhood. It's for like investing. All my college friends got it, and I got it too. It turns out that they stored your passwords in plain text. So had they been hacked, all our passwords would have been exposed. And you would think like, oh, so what? They have my password for that one site. The problem is that people, they tend to reuse passwords. I am not the exception. I do that too. And that's why often sometimes like you get hacked, but you didn't really do anything weird. I remember in high school, excuse me for a sec. In high school, there was this site, I think it was 000 web host, but basically I just signed up very briefly to like try out something. And I used the password that I always use. And then shortly after they were hacked, and they didn't tell anyone. And then later my email got hacked. And so I was just like, what the heck? But it turns out you really should not be reusing passwords, and we'll go into this later. The next one is a forensics demo. So it's not an exercise because it's sort of rather difficult to get you set up, and it was difficult to get set up too. There's this nice GitHub repo with a bunch of exercises you can do that are similar to what we're doing. And an example of forensics is that Snapchat messages can be recovered. So what really happens when you delete something from your computer? It's not actually deleted exactly. So in terms of memory, let's say you have this picture of a cat and it gives this memory box. And it's like, this cat is right here. Well, when you delete your cat picture, let's say that you moved it in trash or the recycling bin, and then you actually deleted it. What happens is before it's like the cat right here. It doesn't remove the cat. The cat is still there. It just stops pointing to the cat. So what that means is if you deleted your cat, let's say, because you didn't want someone to know you were looking at cats, and then the police seized your computer and they're like, I want to know if you've been looking at cats. They can prove that you have been looking at cats. And now, you're probably thinking, well, if things aren't really deleted and, they're still all there, then how come sometimes I can't get my data back? That's a really good question. And that's because, let's say you have this picture of a cat. Let's say you delete it and the police didn't come right away. And then, you downloaded a bunch of pictures of dogs. What could happen is that the computer, depending on how it is, it might overwrite your cat block. And it might turn into a dog block. And that's why sometimes you can't recover your data, because it was coincidentally overwritten, not because it's So it's not because the computer purposely deletes it, but rather it just loses track of it. So I guess it's like when you have like a bunch of papers and you had an organization system, but then suddenly you lose your organization system. Like the papers are kind of still there until like someone scribbles on top of it. But yeah, and onto the demo. Let's see. So media. So there's this tool called volatility, and what that basically does is that it is really good at extracting information from file dumps. So this is a dump of memory, but you know, it's called challenge.raw, but you know, what is challenge.raw? We don't really know. So volatility is a tool that can tell you what it is. So you're just like, okay, this challenge.raw, right? Let's say we already know it's a disk image. Like, tell me about it. And the problem with memory forensics and why it's really not exercise friendly and it's demo friendly is that it is really slow. That's the summary. But yeah, we'll just wait for it. Well, while we're waiting for it, if anyone has any questions, I am ready to answer.
I actually have one, but it feels like an ego member. I should wait for other people, but I just want to know what your difference, like the difference you experience between working at a company like Spotify versus working for the government, and how like the security concerns differed, and like also how your job differed and the culture, just overall what you'd have to say about that.
That is a great question, and that is something I wish I kind of knew way back. So it's a really long story. So with federal service, first things first, they call it like public service versus like private service or like private industry. Public service straight off the bat does not pay as much. They pay according to federal pay laws, but like overall you are being paid below market rate. In addition to that, most jobs in federal service, if you're working in cybersecurity at a big name department, let's say, they will require a security clearance. And what a security clearance is it's a rather invasive process where they basically make sure you're not a terrorist. Now, you would think making sure that you're not a terrorist is really easy, but it's according to the government, it's not easy. So you'll have to provide information like your neighbors, and they will interview your neighbors, your friends, where you've been out of the country in the last 10 years, and any non-citizens, non-US citizens you have spoken with. So that process was not fun. In addition, it takes best case 4 months, worst case years. And they will not hire you until your clearance is done. So what happens is I interviewed in college, and they're like, oh, cool, you got the job, but this is a conditional job offer, which means that if you fail the clearance, we will not give you a job offer. And if you do, great, but we don't know when it will finish. So it took me about a year. So in that year, right, I was like, oh, it couldn't take that long. And I was just waiting. And, you know, in that time, college loans were running after me. So that's just something to know. There are jobs that don't require clearance, but yeah. In terms of culture, I think it really depends on where you work. I heard the CIA has a very young vibe. By young vibe, I mean that where I worked, Department of Defense, often the only people that worked there were people just waiting to retire. So the work culture was very officey. There was absolutely nothing free. Yeah, we had a little like, we all chipped in like $5, I think, a month, and then we kind of bought snacks together. But like, they do not provide great benefits. The only good benefit they provide, I would say, would be the pension, which is why there are so many older people there waiting to retire. In addition, it's very military based, so you'll meet a lot of military people. But because it is military based, it is also military structured. And what that means is, I guess the best way of putting it was, do you guys drive? I went to college in New York City, so I didn't drive, but do you guys drive to college or something? No? Oh, well, I had to drive when I went to Maryland and worked for the federal Department of Defense. And something that I learned when driving is parking is very important. So when I went and worked, I came in at 8 a.m. There were no parking spots left. And, I would be like, but why? I literally had to park a mile from the office and then walk a mile to and from my car. And then, I eventually asked someone at the office, like, why aren't there enough parking spots? And the answer is that the parking spots closest to the building were reserved for the most senior people. So it follows the military structure of basically the longer you've been there, the higher you are in rank, the nicer the things you get. But if you're more entry level, they kind of like, you're kind of on your own. So that was something that I did not like working for federal service and why I eventually left. But the people there were quite nice. But like I said, because most of them were waiting on the pension and retirement, when they were working, it also affected work culture because they weren't working to create a system or like work that would be sustainable, that would work like a few months later. They kind of just did their job and went home because they knew that they would not be there long. So this is kind of a very negative viewpoint, but that was my viewpoint. I can tell you from my friend who worked at a different one, different department. You can't really talk about your job too much too. That's another thing. So he couldn't really tell me the details, but he did say that, he had more leave, he had higher pay, they treated him better, they gave him more interesting projects, things like that. So another, I guess, drawback of having a security clearance job is that you can't really talk about it too much. In fact, I couldn't even say my team name. And yeah, it's just very weird world. Versus private industry. I mean, I'm going to give a glowing review of Spotify at this point from what you've heard. Well, there's no parking, but like that's irrelevant. Spotify is very different in that they seem to, how do I put this? When I was working for public service, we were kind of like, they literally called employees human capital, like kind of made me feel like a cow, like cattle. So like, at Spotify, they view you as a person. And something interesting that my manager would do is like, she would continually check up on me and be like, oh, are you happy doing what you're doing? Would you like me to like talk to this team? Would you like to work on their project? So it's like, when I was working for public service, it seems like the career growth was like literally time-based, like based on how long you stayed there. But at Spotify, it seems like it really matters what you do. And you can easily grow your career because your manager is very explicit about, what you need to do or what you could do. And it's just so much more transparent, probably because there's no like crazy legal stuff. And yeah, the benefits are nice. And of course, they pay more than federal service. The benefits, let's see, they pay you to exercise. So if you exercise 12 times a month, you get $60. And they're not reimbursing the gym membership. They're literally paying you to exercise. So if you like have your Apple Watch and you like send them like your progress, that counts. So I should be doing that. I have not been. And of course, there's this work from anywhere announcement where, because of the pandemic, right, we've been working at home or schooling at home. And now we get to choose whether or not we'd like to stay primarily at home or primarily at the office or a little bit of both. So it's just like, there's just so much more, I guess, freedom. And that's another thing, I guess. When I was working at the DoD, which is Department of Defense, I was always told what to do. You have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this way. But at Spotify, one of the things that surprised me most was my manager's like, we need to do this. How do you think we should do it? And that was like eye-opening because, she gave me choice. So yeah, great place to work. Any other specific questions about either? Cool. Yeah. So we see that this is a Windows image, and it has x86 architecture. So from there, we really only need to know that in order to run the next command. So let's say, you want to know like, hey, what processes is Sky running? So the PS list is an extension that you can get to see the processes that are running on that computer at that point in time. And like I said, be quite slow.
I have a quick question. How did you get into cybersecurity specifically from working at or from your undergrad job?
Oh, that is a very funny story and a little sad. So when I was in middle school, we had this period called talent period. And so you had to audition for talents, and that's what you did all period if you were good at it. So there was art, there was drawing, there was dancing, and there was singing. I was bad at all of them. And when you are bad at all of them, they say that your talent is computers. So they put me in computers. And there we just played around with computers. We made like websites. We used Scratch. If you've heard of it, it's like this thing for kids. It's like a programming language, but you use like little blocks. But anyways, really it was by chance. So I knew that computers was for me because it made sense to me. And it was very logical, and I could spend a lot of time working on computers and I wouldn't hate it. So there was that. But what got me into cybersecurity specifically was that when I first went into college, there was something called Hack Night, and they had free food, and I was hungry. So I wandered into Hack Night, eating the fries and the chicken wings. And then they gave demos like the demos I'm giving now. And what I find interesting about cybersecurity and what stuck to me was that programming is very like, it's linear, right? There's orders, like you're building something slowly from the top to the top. With cybersecurity, it's way less intuitive, right? Because you have to figure out how to break what someone built. And for me, I like challenges. I like doing things that I struggle with, which I guess isn't so bad, but it was, the learning curve was rather high, but that's why, simply because it was a challenge and it's not very linear. And yeah. Cool. So these are the processes that we're running. And I'm not super familiar with Windows, but you can see he was running VBox. VBox is something called a virtual machine. A virtual machine is basically an emulation of a computer inside of a computer. And the reason why people may be using virtual machines is that if you're examining something like malware, if the malware does get loose or get out of your control, it's just controlling your computer emulator and not your real computer. So, you're all good. Yeah, the government would actually inspect malware, but they didn't even trust the virtual computer, which is fair. And they had special infected laptops that were infected with malware. And you can see command.exe, and that is command line, right? And so we're like, gee, I wonder what commands he was running. So there's another plugin called Command Scan, and you scan his command line and see what he's doing. Yeah.
Can I ask another quick question? Sorry.
No, I love it because this is just waiting for the command to execute. But go ahead.
What kind of stuff do you do in your like normal day-to-day life when you're working as a security engineer?
So that question can be very different depending on which security engineer you ask. Primarily what I do is code. So what happens is, let's say you're developing something and you try to like import a library, right? A big problem that companies have is that even though you import libraries, you don't really know if they're secure or if you can trust them. So what my team does is that we have this product that automatically scans all these libraries and tells us if they're vulnerable. And then we take that tool and we try to run it on absolutely everything in Spotify. This sounds pretty easy. It's like, oh, you just run it on everything. But what I've learned working at big tech companies is that things that sound easy end up not being so easy because of the infrastructure, because of the scale, and because there's no standardization, to be frank. So it's just like, for example, when you're working on a group project and you're working in Google Docs, but then someone else is working on GitHub, someone's working on Microsoft Office, and they send you it via email, right? Like if you want to control all of that, you all have to be going through one channel. And unfortunately, that's not what I've experienced, but we are working on it. So simply put, I create a tool that helps scan libraries to determine whether or not they're insecure or whether they may pose a danger. That sounds really boring, but some companies have been compromised with these libraries before. If any of you do web stuff, particularly like JavaScript, the packages and the libraries there are very volatile. Anyone can put one up, anyone can put one down, and everyone's too busy using them to really look at what's inside of them. So there have been big companies that have been hacked through this method. So yeah. Cool. And then let's see. And this is literally what this person's command line was when he was using his computer. And we see that he was just running a Python file named daemon.py. This is all kind of like boring. You're like, oh yeah, he's just running these processes. Oh, he's just running these commands. And there's more visual things you can do. And so I didn't have the best memory dump to do it, but here's a demo. I guess another way I got into security was that I took security classes, and there I spoke to some of my professors who have been very big contributors in the field. So this tool was actually written by one of my professors. What did he teach? He actually just taught like introductions to OS, but like he made this tool that basically is able to draw, like take a screenshot of what you were doing just from a memory dump. So it doesn't, you guys don't need to listen to the sound. Oh, play. Oh, why you're not playing? There we go. So he's just setting it up. But right here, he's opening the VM. So this is his virtual computer that he's running inside of his computer. And the reason why he's running it is that he is getting the dump for this in order to make sure that his tool works. So here you can see that he's just opening up email in his virtual machine, just fooling around. And then you can see him using the same tool that I am. It's called volatility. And then he was able to draw from the memory what he has in the actual machine. It's not the best, but it's actually very impressive to do this code-wise. But yeah, and so from that, if someone was running this tool, they could vaguely tell what you were doing. They could take some of your text. And yeah, I always thought that was pretty cool. I would love to say, oh, but we have cooler things in the government, but I actually don't know. And even if I did, I probably couldn't tell you guys. But yeah, so this is what people who work with forensics do. And then there is reverse engineering. So this is a very famous exercise that Carnegie Mellon University has released. It's called the bomb lab exercise, but it's basically, like I said, like the license key thing. You have to figure out the right code or else it explodes. By explodes, I mean that it just prints out boom, but you don't want it to print out boom. And so there are tools to reverse engineer things. IDA is a tool that you have to pay like $1,000 for. Ghidra is a free tool that the NSA released. And what could go wrong with reverse engineering? Reverse engineering can lead to exploitation, but it could also just lead to just being open source, like being released. So an app, let's say on the App Store, once they figure out your source code, what does your company do? So to the demo, go go to reversing. So this is a C file. It is very long, very strenuous, but this is what you would call the source code. And what that compiles down into is that it goes into something called assembly language. So check.s. And this is kind of what assembly language looks like. So assembly language is like that in between code and binary. So it's just breaking it down for the computer to understand. And this is the language that the computers speak in. And so there are people who actually understand what this is saying. With time, you can too. I'm not the best, but there are tools to make this far, far easier. So normally, with C files, they eventually become executables. In this case, an executable called check, right? And if you try to look at what check is, right, it's an executable, so you don't really get any useful information. So if you were given the executable or the program, you're like, oh, what does it do? I don't really know. You're like, oh, let me run it, right? It's like, oh, that passes a check. That fails a check. It's like, okay, but like, what does this mean? What is it looking for? There are tools to do that. Like I said, there's IDA and there's Ghidra. There's also another tool called Binary Ninja, and that cost $100, but I bought it because my friends had it. And it was a company that was started by a friend of my professor. So let's see if I can find it. Binary Ninja. Oh, we're running out of time. I just noticed. Okay, but the idea is that you use tools to figure out what this is doing. So these demos aren't really the meat and potatoes of actually what I would like to get to. Networking is using a tool to view networking sessions, and I can show you guys that if we have some time later. Cryptography is basically looking at this code and using math to figure out what it means. So an example of that would be like, oh, that's how they figured out what the Zodiac killer code was, which is pretty cool. And if you want more things like this, then there is capture the flag competitions. And that is, although I got into security by stumbling into a club and eating free food, this is how I stayed relevant. And my college wrote a guide on how to start going to CTF. And this is like a whole thing on how to, it's like a calendar of CTF competitions that you can join. And Pico CTF is one that's meant to be introductory, so it's a great place to start. And an interesting thing about CTF is that you can win money, which is nice. You can win prizes, and it's recognized as experience or a project. Emma, how much can I go over, like in terms of time?
We usually try to keep it pretty like on the like at 8, but we might. Normally we have like an 8 board meeting, but I don't think we're actually gonna have that after this.
It's fine. I just want an idea of where I should stop. That's fine. So I just want to drop some nuggets of wisdom I would have loved.
Anu, do you have something?
Oh yeah. We don't have a room reservation, so if you go over for like 5 minutes, okay, fine.
Cool. I'll just go through the last parts quick because this is really the part that I care about. So something you may need to realize is that what you do at your internship can be very different than what you do at your full-time job. And at your full-time job, what I mean is that like normally when you're on an internship, you're given an interesting project, and you are certainly given interesting projects at your job. But a big thing is management. So like I said, like scanning libraries to figure out whether or not they're vulnerable. That's not really a big technical problem. It's somewhat solved. The problem is managing that for all the programs across Spotify. So it's just, you would think like, oh, I'm pretty sure you've had like O of N job interviews before, but that is not what you do day to day. And yeah, it's just really managing things and even communicating with people because, people are imperfect forms of communication. Something that I also wish I knew is that you are accountable for your own time management. What that means is if you have a deadline to hit, you kind of have to hit the deadline. And you would think, oh, I just work like the whole day, but you may have meetings, so you just have to be better at managing your time. And something I wish someone had told me was, job rejections are normal. I had maybe 50, I would say, and I've only been working for like 2 years. So that's a lot. And in the end, I would say I'm pretty happy where I end up. My friend had like 150, but he eventually ended up with a job he liked too. So that's just it's just normal stuff. And relevant to that, I would treat job requirements more like a wish list. So when you're applying to jobs, right, they're like, oh, you have to do this for 2 years, you have to do that for 5 years. That's not necessarily the case. You can still apply, and it's their job to decide whether or not they want you. Because I've been in positions where like I already work at Spotify, and I'm already speaking to people. They're like, oh, we would have hired you back then. And I was like, oh, but I didn't meet the requirements list. And they're like, it's like we would like it, but like it's not necessary. So I literally stopped myself from getting like jobs that I would have gotten. And network more, the humankind. So what I mean by that is that, showing up to meetups, showing up to clubs like this. But the most important thing of networking is that you should walk out with like some contacts. So like I said, my email is linda@spotify.com, excuse me. And I would be totally open to like referring you guys. I don't know how to use the referral system yet, but I'll figure that out. But just email me any questions or like anything you want. And you should understand when to be selling yourself. So like when you network, it's kind of not the time to be modest. You kind of want to stand out. You want to, be like, oh, I did this, I'm familiar with this. Because you don't want to fade to the background. You want them to remember you. Ignore imposter syndrome. That is so hard. But some of the people that I really look up to, they're like, oh man, I wish I was better. I wish I was faster. I was smarter. I was just like, but you are. And they're like, but not enough. So it's just like everyone feels it. And the last thing I would like to emphasize is I had a lot of free time in college, but I didn't know it. Some of you might be busier than I was, but everyone was like, oh, once you get a full-time job, you'll be so busy. I'm like, yeah, right. But then I kind of did end up being busy. What I mean by that is that like, don't wait until you get a job to do things. If you wanted to like start painting, or start a business, like selling baked goods or something, like start it now. You have like the time to do and explore yourself. But yeah. This is just, I think we're about time, so this is not as important. I would like to focus on the questions, if there are any.
I'll pop on. So I'm a first year, and I don't know how much of an answer you will have to this, like seeing as you haven't been working in the field for that long, but still my question sort of is like, in my experience, cybersecurity like certifications were really emphasized as like not like a very important part of like the field, but as you can get very far if you pass a handful of certs like CompTIAs, Oracles, etc. And so like in your experience, how relevant are they? Do you have any? Have you worked to maintain and like keep them up to date? Something like that. Yeah.
So this one, I'm going to give you a terrible answer, but it depends on where you work. So for like, let's say big tech companies or tech companies in general, they don't really mind. For the government, they do mind and they do use that. And for more corporate financial areas, it helps. What I would say about these is that they often push it on you because they're making money from you taking the test. But in some cases, there are some certs that would help. I believe like the offensive security one really does help for security consulting jobs. But it's kind of like, I would think of it as, do you have projects on your resume that are interesting? And then if you do, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you don't, then you can just do certs if that's what you're better at. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool. Any other questions?
I feel like I should throw out there, if you guys would like to go, feel free to go. I understand you guys are busy, but if you guys want to stay on and ask some questions, Linda, like I'm sure you seem so open, you wouldn't mind like staying on. And so pressure to stay, and there's no pressure to not ask a question if you're worried about time.
Yep. And once again, I would like to emphasize my email. So it's lindan@spotify.com. And you could reach out to me for like anything, and I'll help you if I could.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
All right, well, since we have no more questions, I think I'm going to stop the recording, and you guys are free to do what you want with your email. Thank you so much for coming, Linda. That was I learned a lot. I think everyone else did. And it was just really, really nice to have you come to Newitt. If you want to keep in touch with us, our email is always NUWomenInTech. And maybe we'll be able to secure a Spotify approval sometime in the future.
Yeah, you could do that with my teammates. I believe they were interested. They were just curious about the timeline.